fabulous academic knowledge with a doctorate in social policy from University of Birmingham, UK, focusing on the role of head teachers and teachers in the implementation of national curriculum in school. Before starting the session, let's have a small poll and see what do you understand from the policymakers, and what is the role of a teacher, or how much teachers are participating in policy making. Let me share a poll with you. Okay, it's already shared. Oh, great. All right. So we have majority of the teachers are saying it's like a 50-50%, like 52% teachers so far have said that they are participating, or the audience have said they have participated in making policy in school, and 48% participants have said they haven't participated or not participating in the policy making. So let's move to our speaker for today, Dr. Fatima. Dr. Fatima, over to you.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a big thank you to Rafia and her team for inviting me to talk about a topic that's really close to my heart. And it's really, really great to see that nearly 50% of you do believe that you have a really important role in policy making. So that's come as a really good surprise, because I think policy making is a very difficult sort of concept. So I'll try to bring it together in 30 minutes to explain it, and how, as teachers, you are the policymakers as well. But it's fantastic that at least 50% of the participants believe that they are making policies. So what I'll do is I'll share my PowerPoint presentations, and let me know when you can view it. So just bear with me.
Shaaria, thank you so much for joining. The 50% who said that they participated in policy making, also when they will hear your session, then we will take this poll again, because maybe what they think is policy is not policy, actually.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I'm just, bear with me. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try to talk to you about this. So policy making, I mean, first of all, thank you for a fantastic introduction, but I'll just add that, most of you, when I used to work in Pakistan 20 years or so ago, I was known by the name Shaaria, so my middle name, Shaaria Syed, and I worked as a head teacher in the city school, Beacon House, and I established the first city school in Peshawar years ago. And from there, I worked as a trainer with the British Council. And in the UK, I've done my master's in education management and then a PhD. And then from there, currently, although I'm not in the education sector directly, I'm working with organizations and implementing digital transformation and helping them use digital transformation. Like Asfar was saying, the content, the stuff that's been happening, it's immense. And then just using those systems effectively. But I'm also a school governor, and that kind of gives me in touch, because I help the school that I am. It's a special needs school, and I help them setting up policies and just making sure that what they're doing for the school and the children are right, especially in the pandemic, which has been really a big challenge all over. So teachers as policy makers. So I know you've had a poll where you were asked sort of who are the policy makers, or what do you think about policy making, and do you think teachers are policy makers? But initially, I mean, these are the key workers that, you know, the policy makers we think we are: the government, Ministry of Education, exam boards. So although I can't see your chat, but I was just thinking if you can just put in your chat and think, who do you think are the policy makers here? So if I just minimize it, maybe then I'll be able to see a bit of a chat here. But unfortunately, with technology, that's one of the biggest things I'm finding, is that sometimes we have focused on presentation, you can't see the chat right now. So anyway, can anyone tell me if they're putting in their options of who they think are policymakers?
Oh,
Naina, can you see anything?
so we have got some response from the audience. Some of them said Ministry of Education, some said teachers. Let's see what Dr. Fatima has to say about.
Really? Yeah, most of it. So that's what I'm going to say. First of all, I like to explain about what is policy making, because sometimes there's different definitions of what policy making is. But in the simplest terms, policy making is a plan of action which is agreed by a group of people. That's the basic, simple definition of policy making: is a plan of action that is agreed by a group, and that group could be a political party, or it could be anywhere. You know, at the director of a business, the school, and also that policymakers are people, a person, or a group of people who are responsible for or involved in developing a plan. So that's what policy is. It's actually a plan of action, and sometimes it's like a decision, and sometimes it's like a guidance of what should be done. But it's really sort of, when you look into academic literature, there's different variations of, you know, policy definitions, and there's a lot of, this area is constantly evolving around what is policy making and who are policy actors. So that just shows that the concept of policy making isn't very concrete, and it's constantly evolving. So traditionally, even currently, there's a debate about top-down and bottom-up policy making. So traditionally, it was believed that policies were set by the government, Ministry of Education, they were the policy makers, and then they were translated by the civil servants, academic policies, exam boards got involved, and then it went down to schools who received and delivered them. And then the beneficiaries of the policies were students in the form of learning they received. So both the school of thoughts, top down and bottom up, believe that it's a process. So policy making happens in process, and at each stage there are different policy actors, such as, you know, the Ministry of Education, the bureaucrats, the exam boards, the school principals, the senior leadership of the schools, and then it kind of narrowed down to the teachers. Whereas in the 80s, there was an American scholar called Michael Lipsky, and he came with this new concept that really shook the whole policy-making debate. And he said, no, actually, the people on the front line, the bottom end, he called them street-level bureaucrats. These are the policy makers, not the policies that are set by the government. The true policy makers are at the bottom, and they are that's who makes policy. And it says whatever. So, for example, in his sort of the street level bureaucrats, he meant teachers, he meant police officers on the ground. So it's any public sector worker that are actually delivering those policies. And he said, although the policies are set and written at the national level, there's a gap. He identified a gap between what is written and what is happening in practice. And then, according to him, whatever is happening in practice is what the policy is. So the policy can be anything, but if it's not done in practice, that's not a policy. So that was what it was. It was really groundbreaking at that time. And what he just said was that the policy is actually made at the bottom and it just goes up to the top. So it's really great to see that 50% of you believe that teachers are policymakers, and it would be interesting to know, and like Rafia said at the end of this session, if I'm able to change your mind, that 50% who thinks that, you know, teachers don't play a part in policy making. So that's the way. So now, how do they define the real policymakers? Teachers, they say, so Lipsky said that actually teachers are authors of policies. And he said how they do it is that they actually make decisions. So the teachers have a strong influence of interpreting policy and engaging at policy at different number of levels. So it's the teachers who engage with the policies. So that's where policy happens. That's where magic happens, when teachers are not only just receiving, but they're actually interacting with the policy. And that policy, and how do they interact? It's by how they decide to teach and how that teaching happens. So it's like, you know, one of the key questions you would say, how do teachers make policy? Like, how can we make policy? Yeah, it happens in the classroom. There's an interaction, but what is happening? So that's really, you know, so Lipsky said, and that was one of the things I found in my research, was that my research is around, they made this big in policy revision, they revised the curriculum and the national curriculum in England, and they put financial education, teaching of financial education to secondary students as compulsory, as mandatory. Schools had to teach financial education. So when I started looking at it, although the financial education was in the timetable, there was time, but when I started digging up, it wasn't happening in all classrooms. When I started asking students, I started asking teachers, I found that students had a very different experience of financial education. Some of them even said, we were not even taught. And that made me wonder. I said, if it's in the curriculum, if it's in the timetable, then why are students and some of the teachers thinking that's not being delivered? So that kind of got me digging into it. And I realized that actually a lot of teachers, where effective learning and where effective education was happening, was the teachers who were really looking at it and teaching that topic and taking interest in it and making it their own. And I mean, it's you know, not right to say maybe, but there were some teachers who just were not interested in financial education for different reasons, and I'll explain it later on, and they were not teaching it. And so the students, which were actually not benefiting of a life skill that the government deemed important, that it was in the curriculum, it was mandatory, but it wasn't being taught. And so students had a different learning experience in the same school and in the same year group. So like in England, you have 1 year and they have different sections, the same in England, and they call it year group. And obviously here you've got sections of the classroom. So even if they're in year 9, each classroom, each student in that different classroom had a different experience. And that's how, and it was because, as Lipsky says, it's the discretion that the teachers use. So what is discretion? It's the decisions, the choices that teachers make that makes a policy. And that's where policy happens, and that affects the learning of the students. So when I dig deeper and I said, why is there a difference between learning of different students, and what role is teachers playing in it? And I realized that teachers have a really important role in it because of the decisions and the choices they were making at that time in the classroom. So I realized that the factors that affected those choices and decisions are two main. You can categorize them into two main ones. One are the personal factors, so which is their teachers' own attitudes, beliefs, their policy position, what they believed of the policy, how important they thought that was important to them, how important they thought it was for the students, and so that's impacted on the choices they made. Also their sort of pedagogic preferences. So you sit down and in the curriculum, you might be saying, oh, you need to teach it in a particular way, but they just had control over how they taught. And some prefer doing the chalk and talk method, which I'm doing right now. And that's not the style I normally do, but that sometimes the situation requires the chalk and talk method. that sometimes you have to, but some teachers just did it because that's what they found where they were comfortable with. And then also the years of experience. So the more you experience the teacher was, the more unwilling they were to change their way of teaching, or they stick to the old method. And so that's also, sometimes it was good. The years of experience gave them the confidence to make decisions that were sort of not, sort of extend the policy a bit and go beyond. But sometimes it occurred and had manifested in a negative impact. And so that was it. And obviously the other things, that there's not just the personal teachers, obviously the teaching happens in context. So they are constrained. So there were some contextual sort of factors that were affecting that delivery. And one of the biggest thing was, how much autonomy did the teacher have over teaching that content? So sometimes in some areas, the school or the curriculum, it was very prescriptive and they had to stick to that. And that was also causing teachers to kind of not teach, or not teach it because they didn't have the freedom to adapt to the style that they were comfortable with. And the other thing is, there's a term called subject status. And I don't know, I'm sure you might be aware of it, but each subject in the curriculum has a status. So like maths, science, English are really high subject status. They have a really high status in subjects, and that's so that also affects. So like the subject status is determined by whether they're assessed or not, whether it's it will come, how are they assessed, what importance is the university giving, and that subject status also determines how much effort a teacher puts in delivering what they want to do. And the other thing was the workload. I mean, as teachers are not teaching. I've seen teachers who have to become like, they are the head of departments. They have, they're heading clubs. They have got other management responsibilities, and that also increased. So the more the workload increased, the less it affected the quality of teaching being delivered. So the teachers were kind of were trying to find ways of dealing and delivering. And then if they could, they would not, kind of take some shortcuts. And that affected the learning that was happening in the classroom. So I'm sure you all must have examples in your life where you went beyond, like, policy said something else and you went beyond it. And there might be some teachers, who just weren't bothered, either ignored the rule, the policy altogether. So be it in behavior, be it in the curriculum, be it anything. So that's kind of where it's really important. I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of kind of stress that the choices that teachers make affects the policy, and that's where you're making the policy. So that's where true policy happens. And what is the aim of a policy, a rule, a curriculum? It is to have learning, to give learning to the students. If the students are not benefiting from that policy, then that policy is not effective. So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to say that it's really important to realize for teachers that you have a lot of control. You are in control of what happens in the classroom and the learning of the students. So just kind of stress that. So I'll try to explain it with an example, a case study. So obviously, I was in Asper's session around technology and being an entrepreneur. And it's amazing to hear that there's a lot of stuff happening in Pakistan, and teachers are at the forefront of it. That's amazing. And it's so the pandemic, all of us know across the world, the pandemic resulted in school closures, and in the last 18 months have been really stressful, and we have to learn to live in a new way, to work in a new way, to teach in a new way. So we're all working from home right now. This is a Zoom conference which has provided a lot of benefits, like I don't have to fly into Pakistan to be with you and present my ideas. I can do it from here. So that's been the advantages. There's a lot of benefits that this pandemic has brought this change has brought, but there's been a lot of disbenefits and negative outcomes of it. So one of the things that obviously it's been, school closures ended up you sort of the teaching remotely. So the government policy was school closure, and they advised, they had standard operating procedures. They implemented stuff like online teaching, and they had online television programs. So the policy was there, things were there, but did it actually happen in practice? So the question is, what was happening in practice? What was actually, what were the children doing? What were they receiving? What learning happened during those 18 months? And that's really important, because according to the World Bank, the learning has been impacted. 50% of the children's learning, is being sort of impacted because of reading. I mean, there's a stats around who do not learn by the age of 10, where 47.3% of children didn't learn by the age of 10, but now it's increased to 50% because of the school closures, because of moving on to online learning, remote learning. And the other thing was that they have also found that there's a 0.3 to 0.8 years of learning loss to children. So there's been a big learning loss in these 18 months. And the government did everything. There were policies, there were SOPs. The school tried to do everything and implement as best as it could. As I was listening to and you're all aware, Asfar was pointing out 3 barriers. There's been the infrastructure. We don't have the right infrastructure. Pakistan had an energy crisis. And as well as that, it's the content. The content isn't good. But I would add one more thing. It was the skills. Teachers had to do a lot of rapid learning to adapt to this new style of working. It is not just teachers, it's across board, working from home. I work in the health sector. We had to adapt to Zoom and MS Teams, and that became the language. So there's been a lot of learning in a very short space of time. And that's why a lot of things that were in policy didn't actually happen. And the impact was the learning was affected. So now, what all that means, like I'm talking about teachers as policymakers. So how can we deliver education in this rapidly changing world? Technology is here to stay. And how do we as teachers learn to adapt and make the most of it? And so that the policies and sort of shorten the gap between what is written to what is happening in the classroom. So how can we do this? So I think there's first thing is we need to recognize that the old ways of doing things is no longer relevant or effective. And that happened with the digital this pandemic made us realize that we have to change. We have to adopt technology, whether we like it or not. That meant that we have to unlearn and relearn. So there had to be a lot of unlearning and relearning. So that is important, to build new skills, to develop a new attitude, to develop more confidence into it. And the third bit is that we need to just practice and practice and practice and get used to it. So it's becomes part of us. And that's what is called the lifelong learning cycle. So according to Alvin Toffler, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. So the definition of illiteracy is changing, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So you have to learn, but you have to be open to unlearn and relearn. So what is unlearning? We all talk about learning. We know what learning is, okay? We that's how we learn. But what is actually unlearning? And there's a really good book by Barry O'Reilly, and he explains that unlearning is the process of letting go, reframing and moving away from once useful mindsets, beliefs, and acquired behaviors that were effective in the past, but now limit our success. So some behaviors, some beliefs that used to work in the past have changed. And we need to remember that and abandon these. And it's not about forgetting and removing. When we talk about unlearn, it's not forgetting, but it's adapting. So you're building up on what you know with something new. And so you've got, like, unlearning has 3 parts. One is that you recognize. First is the recognition bit. that the old way of working, the old model of working is not going to work anymore. It's changing. The other bit is that then, and that is really, really challenging. So learning to unlearn is really challenging. And it's also challenging just to realize that actually, the way that the thoughts, the way I used to think, the way I used to work, the way I used, my beliefs and attitudes are not going to work in this new world. It's also about finding and creating a new model. So it's more, unlearning is more about finding a new model that is a mix of the old and the new, and then that you can use in today's world, and that will help you move forward. And the last part of it is that you need to ingrain the new mental habits. You have to ingrain, you have to practice, you need to develop. And it's like learning to drive. Initially, it takes time. You need to learn the controls, and then the more you practice, the more it becomes automatic. And that has to happen in a continuous circle. It has to go on and on. So that's what it is. And part of my job as a coach here is actually helping organizations and individuals to first raise self-awareness. The big thing is recognizing that this is what I'm doing is not working. And that's really challenging for a lot of people. So that's the first bit. And then the second bit is learning how to learn new stuff and how to incorporate it in the organization and in your life. So quickly, I know, so quite conscious of the time. So for me, I've kind of summed it in 7 C's. I call them the 7 C's. I think if we are very conscious of these 7 C's, that can help us in letting go of past habits, because unlearning is letting go of the past and moving forward. So first is that you have to be committed. You have to commit. You need to know that you're committed to give time, skills, and knowledge to developing yourself. So like you've committed coming to this session, this conference for 3 days, fantastic. I can see commitment there. Then be confident that whatever learning you take in from this session, from this conference, that you are going to apply it into practice. If you're not going to apply that learning into practice, then that's wasted time. Then the other thing is being curious. You have to be curious and be a bit of, realize that, be open-minded and curious about understanding the value of meaningful, responsive teaching and learning. What does that mean to you? What does it mean? Be open about it. And then be challenging. Challenge the status quo, challenge what's happening in the school, challenge what's happening in your classroom, challenge, but positively, constructively, and look at ways of how you can improve it. And then it's around working collaboratively with that. You have to understand how you can work in partnership with students, because there's a big element of recognizing and making students realize that they are leaders as well. So there's a bit around working with students, not just working with your colleagues, and being critical and creative. So you have to be self-aware, have to be really constructively critical about yourself and the surroundings, and then be creative, be really open-minded and be creative and be ready to experiment and be innovative and ready to go ahead and, and deliver what you think is required to improve the learning of the students. And it's really amazing and really heartwarming when I was listening to Asper saying that a lot of teachers are going onto YouTube and creating contents, and there's some amazing content that's happening. So that's really heartwarming. And that's how when you make those decisions that you become policy makers. So for me, and the 3 takeaways from this session would be that just to remember that teachers are not simply receivers of policies. You just don't simply receive policies and deliver it, but you are policy makers in your own right. That's really important. And then education, the other thing is that education policies and school curriculum are only effective if you as teachers take ownership. You have to take ownership of the policies, of the rules, of the curriculum that you are teaching. You need to believe that what you are teaching will benefit the students, because you are preparing these. This is the first, the next generation, and they are going to be the decision makers, the policy makers, the leaders of tomorrow. So you need to really believe in what you're teaching. And I think as a 21st century teachers, it is our duty to develop our students' learning and our own development by learning to unlearn. So that's it from me. Any questions? I've sort of sent you my contact details are there. If you've got, any questions or you want to discuss this further, I'm happy for you to contact me either through LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fatma. I think that was a wonderful session. We have learned a lot about the policy making and how actually it has impacted teachers and schools. We have few questions from you, from our audience. Let me share those questions with you. First question is, when in the pandemic situation, how much do you think policies has been affected or impacted in the current situation? When we look into the current situation, to what extent do you think that policies has also been impacted in that?
Okay, I mean, obviously policies are always changing. That's the nature of policies, because as new things happen, new guidance. So what is policy? It's a guidance, isn't it? If you look at policies from schools or from the government, it's a guidance. And then the exam boards translate. For example, like the policy was around examinations. The policy has changed to remotely examination, like the GCSEs and A levels. A lot of them were a teacher's assessment. So the students didn't sit and took an exam last year. But this year, the policy, I believe in Pakistan, they decided to take the GCSEs and A levels. But then again, the policy changed because of the circumstances. So I think policies are constantly changing. And like, for example, in this, the school closure policy, that came because of the external environment. So yes, they do change a lot, depending on the environment and what's happening.
All right. My next question is, and this is the last question. So, like in the current situation, like when we think that teachers are being involved in the policy making, so is that only beneficial for the teachers or the management as well? Or the school leads or management also has a positive impact on them as well?
Yeah, so like I said, it's benefit not just for the management, it's beneficial for the students, it's beneficial for the country, because overall. And I think there are different ways in teachers that can be involved in policy making. So one is, like I just said, when it's happening in the classroom, the decisions that you're making are impacting learning, because every policy has an aim. It's the outcome. What is the benefit? Every policy that is brought, whether it's at the national level, whether it's at school, or whether it's really, department level, the aim of the policy is benefit. So it's either benefiting the student or it's benefiting the teacher. So if teachers are involved in policy making, so one is like in the classroom, when the decisions and the choices they make. But if you say up in the school policy making, like if there's a, I know you schools have sessions like teachers get together to lesson planning sessions, or as a policy the school has decided to go remote teaching and developing contents together. If teachers get involved, they take interest, they do it and they deliver it and then learn. So I know teaching is a reflective cycle, so you'd reflect on it and improve it. So yeah, that's how you get involved in policy making. So rather than thinking we are writing policy with the government, I'm sure there's a lot of educationists. Hopefully we all try, the more and more educationists are involved in policy setting at the national level when they're making decisions, that they should be involved. But even if you start doing it at the bottom level, the impact travels up. And obviously it impact travels down to the students. And if you develop your students, they are the next people, the next generation who will be setting policies. So there's a difference between making and setting policies.
Well said.
A long answer,